All right, if we can have everybody, I know you just left, but if we could come back in, that would be great. Please grab your seats, please. Settle down. It's time for our keynote speaker. As way of introduction, an October 1969 event for Formula Vs and Formula Fords at Pocono Raceway that drew 328 spectators. That was the humble beginnings of the International Motorsports Association, or IMSA, as you see on your screen. What was then, and certainly compare it with what is now. Our keynote speaker, and we are honored, very honored to have Mark here as our keynote speaker, has been there pretty much from the beginning. And we're very excited to hear his first-person narrative of the growth of this amazing audience, or amazing organization, excuse me. So please welcome Mark Raffauf.
Thank you. So I'm going to try and give you 56 years of history in about 45 minutes. It's all visual. You don't have to read anything other than that logo, which I was inspired last night at the theater watching the film about Cameron and Gene Argetsinger starting the racing here, and wanted to say that John and Peg Bishop, who are given the credit for finding or founding IMSA with help from people like Cameron and Gene, Bill France at NASCAR, they're from Cortland. All right. JC and Duke's father was the one that convinced John Bishop to become the executive director of the SCCA in the 60s, which under his oversight created the Can-Am, Trans Am, and Formula 5000. The schism that was brought up earlier or in that film about pro racing drivers versus amateur racing drivers and the attitude of the SCCA at that time is what had John resign. And shortly after that, he got a call from Bill France in Daytona. Bill, John, Cameron all knew each other from Sebring, 24 Hours of Daytona, SCCA sort of sanctioning other major events. And I wanted to start with that because kind of it all started right here, along with a lot of other things. And what I'm going to try and talk about is the people, not just the individuals, but they had groups of people. They surrounded themselves with really smart people, really enthusiastic and passionate people for 5 decades through various ownerships and so on. So I start with this. This actually resides in the IMRRC. It is John Bishop's original artwork of the logo of IMSA from day one. It has a little water spot on the eye up there, so he was a little sloppy with his watercolors. Anyway, it all started with a phone call between these two guys, Bill France on the right, John Bishop on the left. They're sitting outside the Turn 4 tunnel at Daytona. Bill called them up and said, we need to do a road racing program with a NASCAR business mindset behind it. So away they went. So what was first? Pocono International Raceway. This is actually the cover of the program of the very first IMSA race at Pocono, which is on the little, I think it's an 1/8 mile oval on the tri-oval area. And I don't know that John designed it, but I bet he had something to do with it. So we started with Formula Fords. It looked like that. Initially, there were small ovals that worked out pretty good. So Bill France said, well, let's go to Talladega and Daytona with 50 Formula Fords. That didn't necessarily work as well because they ran around in big packs and had huge accidents. So we said, okay, we're not doing that anymore. At the same time, they started a Formula V program. So IMSA's legacy and throughout its careers of 5 decades always had open wheel elements. So we tried that, or John and the little staff at the time tried that. It was great racing until they crashed into each other, which all you needed was one guy to sneeze in the middle of the pack and you had a 20-car pileup. So we decided that wasn't a good idea. You can see how it sort of generates into pack racing with these guys. Great stuff, but kind of scary. So what was the next idea? We need closed wheel cars. So John decided he would take his background in Trans Am. We'll take those Camaros, Mustangs, Javelins. We'll mix it up with FIA GT cars, Porsche 911s. In this case, that's, I think, Peter Gregg being chased by Juan Montalvo in a 2-liter Escort from Europe. These were little GT cars, and we mixed them up with the big GT cars. And next thing you know, in 1972, there was the Camel GT, which R.J. Reynolds Tobacco came in, recognized it as a good product, and away that went. The other thing we did was we created a series for what was then the new little cars. So in this, you got a Fiat, a Gremlin, a Mazda, a Pinto, And I think that's a Volvo in the back. But John was astute enough, and IMSA was astute enough to realize all these manufacturers had no place to race their new product. So we created this, and that's when little cars, but I think the first Honda to ever race in the United States was a Civic in IMSA. Most of these brands, BMW and others, just grew from this into GT cars and bigger cars. The American manufacturers, we had the Pinto, the Gremlin, and other similar cars. And what was great about this, they were running on street tires. They took BFGs, initially Goodyears, shaved them down to 3/32 so they wouldn't fall apart, and you could run around Daytona. As an example, Tom Waugh in about 1975 did a closed course record at Talladega at over 150 miles an hour in an AMC Hornet on street tires. Street tires on race cars, not new, but running a whole series on them was a relatively new idea. So this grew great. It also provided the cars that could fill the back of the GT fields as that grew in 72 and 73. Raced in the daytime, raced at night. And then we got into the mid-70s. By that point, people like Porsche, BMW, Ford with their Capris, most of the European manufacturers would build a limited run of customer race cars, Porsche Carreras or whatever, which of course, back then I think Porsche made about 5,000 911s a year. I think GM made about 300,000 Camaros. So to equate a Camaro with a Porsche was a technical problem. So John, and this is his original artwork, decided to apply what the FIA applied to the European cars to American cars, and he created, more or less by himself, All-American GT. This happens to be a Vega, which was replaced rapidly by the Chevy Monza. And that became the mainstay, along with John Greenwood's big Corvettes, to compete against the European brands. And that's really where IMSA's growth started in the production car racing, which was GT cars. So that was the first AA GT car, which, of course, is a Vega. Looks a little bit like the drawing. But that didn't last long. And as back to more RS cars, this is a typical RS race at Daytona in this same time frame. Car and driver, Pinto is up there. Nick Craw, president of the SCCA, is in the BMW in second. George Alderman, who drove in the first Formula Ford race at Pocono, is in the lead in turn one in the wet. The Monza, Al Holbert doing an engine change during the 24-hour race, a planned engine change, which wasn't really the best way to go about a 24-hour race, but they did it anyway. We did Formula Atlantics. We co-sanctioned the Formula Atlantic series in the era of Villeneuve and Rahal and Elliott Forbes Robinson. The Canadians did the Canadian races. IMSA did the US races. 1976 this is. I think the ski rule car, that's Villeneuve in the back. Yep. Am I right? Is that right? Yeah. So, little piece of video. Do I hit this or how do I start it? Oh shit. So this is 1976, Road Atlanta. Those of you who know the track will be stunned at what the place looked like in 1976. But you see Camaros, Porsches, Monzas, a lot of Monzas. This was the Monza, that first all-around AAGT victory. Al Holbert in the car. There's 4 or 5 of these little 2-minute clips of video. And this wasn't video, this was film because video hadn't been invented yet. And just to show you what the tracks were like, what the cars looked like, and not just still pictures. But this car was the first mass-produced tube frame race car. Before NASCAR, before anybody else. 14 of those were built by Decon, and 3 or 4 other constructors built cars to the same rules. But they had 6-liter Chevys in the front of a Chevy Monza in a tube frame chassis, but the car captured the look of the road car, just as the CSL and the Corvette, another Monza, which was the intent. Marketing-wise, the cars had to look like what they were supposed to look like. But you can see here the front straightaway at Atlanta. There's no pit lane on the right as there is now. There actually was a stream over there where people would be periodically pulled out of the water. And there we have it. Al Holbert winning the first All-American GT overall victory at Road Atlanta in 1976. And now we can go back and keep going. Those were the 2 main antagonists. That's Michael Kaiser on the right with Milt Minner a lot of times, and Al Holbert, who used Doc Bundy, a whole bunch of other drivers, but I didn't want to talk too much about that. But beautiful car. People remember them today and still go, you know what? for something from the mid-70s, it's still kind of a current-looking piece of hardware. That was the antagonist for everybody, which is the Porsche RSR. This is Mike Kaiser before he got the Monza. But this car was sold in 1974, brand new, 3-liter Porsche RSR was $23,000. Of course, there's inflation, but it still was a pretty good deal. The other great car there was the CSL BMW. This came about in 1975. The factory decided IMSA in the US was the place to race. So they gave up their touring car program in Europe and brought the whole mess. Ronnie Peterson, Brian Redmond, Sam Posey, Alan Moffat. They brought the whole factory deal over here. They came to Daytona, didn't do too well. Moved into Bobby Allison's shops in Hueytown, Alabama, and converted the cars from European touring cars to NASCAR stock cars with triple door bars and stiffened them all up and then became the cars to beat because of that. That's a typical, let's turn one at Laguna in that same era, but Monza, BMW, Carl Schaefer's big block Camaro, Porsche, Charlie Kemp's Mustang at the very top on the right, which was also an all-American GT car. And then we decided we'd go stock car racing. So we invented American Challenge. This is Gene Felton in a Buick Skylark. We didn't know what we were going to do with them, but we basically created a class. And I want to emphasize all of this stuff you see here. John Bishop and the staff at the time, we'd sit around and say, what do we need to have for our product? Our product is entertainment. We're not here to set the world on fire. We're here to entertain people. Go to places like Road Atlanta and Road America and have people come and watch. This is all before television as well. So we created this. We ran them with our GT cars for a couple years, and then Kelly came along and we ran 10 years of American stock cars, which NASCAR tried to do at the same time. Didn't work out as well as ours did, but road racing stock cars was a new idea. Again, sat around one day and decided, what do we need to do? We need something like that. We need these kind of cars to be on the racetrack in some way. Again, this is Riverside, BMW's out front, Ford Capri behind, gaggle of Porsches. Great shot of Holbert's car, beautiful cars, beautifully turned out. And then we got into Group 5. So now you see, going back to that, you can see the beginning of the big wings and things and the extended front splitters. The car in the back is Chris Cord's Monza. The car in the front is David Hobbs in the McLaren BMW 320i Turbo. Also a factory deal, but run out of McLaren in Detroit. Group 5 came along, and again, it was the same situation. The OEs in Europe made 935s, a few of these BMWs, and then they became the dominant cars. John Bishop always wanted a product that the little guy private team could win the big races in. Okay, so Daytona, Sebring, there had to be something that you were not dependent on a car company to have a car, because after a year or two, those guys quit making them. So every generational shift, technically, in IMSA GT racing has been due to coming up with something new that would take the place of OE manufactured built purpose race cars and have it available to anybody who wanted to buy it, okay? And that was an underlying theme for 5 decades, and you'll see that later. That's the other big monsters, the big Greenwood Corvettes. This particular car at Daytona in 1974 did 212 miles an hour at pit in at Daytona. It's the size of a small house. It has a 494 cubic inch cross-ram Can-Am engine in it. It's got tires on the back big enough for a semi, but it was fast. How did that work against the Porsches, technically? Everybody got 32 gallons of gas. So 250 miles at Daytona, this car was 2 to 3 seconds a lap faster than most of the other cars, but had to make 2 more pit stops to get the fuel. And what happened in the end, they converged. And the racing was really quite excellent because of that. Am I blocking anybody's view here? You guys see? Okay. Another great shot of BMW at Sebring in the old days, where you could see between the car and the big airplanes, there's nothing. But that's the way it was. So gives you an idea. That's the winning car from 1975. But yeah, they used to have these Constellations, DC6s, DC7s lined up there. They're basically cutting them up for scrap, but there's a little vestige of a snow fence there in front of the windscreen, but there's nothing between parked airplanes and the race cars. This is a shot from Daytona, same year, where there's actually trees there, which of course have been long chopped up by spectators for firewood or whatever, but there's no more trees in Daytona. Another good shot of Chris Cord's Monza, Mid-Ohio. Again, beautiful cars. This is now 1978, and this is pretty important year, technically. The two front row cars are factory 935 Porsches. One's a customer car, which is Kramer, and the other one is the Martini factory car. Behind them are the two in Altera GTP cars. GTP came about through a collaboration with the ACO and the Le Mans people to develop a prototype car that a number of private constructors could build and powered by engines that anybody could buy. So those two cars are powered by Cosworth, 3-liter Cosworths, kind of a detuned Formula One engine. And they actually did pretty well, but a lot of people don't understand that that was a collaboration with the ACO. It then led to bigger political issues in a few years with the FIA, but we'll get to that. So every time we came out with new cars, Daytona's the first race. It's the Super Bowl race. At no time did any new car beat the old cars at Daytona when they first came out, until the DPI cars in the mid-20-teens, okay? So the car that won is a little 43, Hurley Haywood up there in the upper right, Porsche Carrera RSR. It's been in the game since 1974. It's been 4 years, and it's still a competitive big race winning car. All this other stuff broke or crashed, so that's part of it. Again, another shot showing you actually the first prototype of the turbo car is the 00 car, which Interscope had, which was driven by Danny and Guy's factory car, Kramer car, one of the GTP and Alteras. This is, we talked about consequential racetracks. A couple shots from Lime Rock. This is before the chicane, when you have 850 horsepower going up a hill. Which was, I hate to say, kind of normal. There's even a more dramatic one that I know Eric is waiting to see, but these cars were absolutely terrible to drive. You had to really be on your game. Very difficult to drive. Huge amount of power, based on a standard 911 shell, kind of a flexible flyer until they got here and everybody stiffened them up. Huge rear tires, tiny small front tires. Aerodynamically, not that good either. So in those days, you could run a twin turbo setup or a single turbo setup with two different specifications of weight because of lag. No electronics existed yet to control turbo lag. So two small turbos worked a little better, but the big one made more power. So this is a rare photograph of Peter Gregg's two cars at Road Atlanta trying to decide which one he would race. One's a single, one's a double. So then they morphed into, this is JLP3. They began to get Kramer bodywork designed in California. And I would say by 1979, 80, we'd have 15 935s on the grid, one BMW, one or two Ford Mustang Zach Speed cars. But of the 15 935s, no two of them were the same. Every team got the cars, hot rodded them, changed them. The rules then, philosophically, were if it didn't say you couldn't, you could. So they had, dry ice in the intercoolers. They had Freon sprays in the intercoolers for qualifying. And everybody said they were cheating, and we're going, well, no, it doesn't say you can't do that. So they're just being a little more innovative than you are. Try it, see if it works for you. So it generated a lot of diversity, hot rods. Another video. This is Laguna Seca. It's Ray Hall in the 9, and Fitzpatrick. And I think this is the race where the first Lola T600, no, it's not. This is Group 5. Whittington Brothers, Ford Zach Speed Mustang, pretty evenly matched in speed down the back straightaway at Daytona. A little lock up there. Yo. But you could see Porsche, Paul Newman in a Nissan, Ford, somebody crashing the Andal car. But again, we got to another point where if you didn't have a Porsche 935, which you could no longer get, you had to build one out of a wrecked streetcar or something like that, and that's what they did. But we got to the point where it was all the same car with one or two exceptions. So we needed this GTP concept to generate something new. And that was a car that, we'll get to it shortly, the Lola T600, also the first customer GTP car. Built about 15 of those. That's the ultimate form of the 935, which by then, in 82, 83, was running full ground effects, still a rear engine car, but the only thing left that was a 911 would be the front windshield, cowl, and side windows. The rest of it, as you can see, is heavily different from a 911. Again, all allowed. Shot from Daytona. These cars were great. They had mechanical wastegates. They made all kinds of weird noises. Spectators love them. They burned a lot of excess fuel through the turbo, so every time you got off the engine, you got a big flame out the back, so it was kind of spectacular to watch these cars and hear them. They were not just a visual thing, they were a great sensory overload in every regard. RS cars, they're still around, running around on street tires. Now you see Datsuns, Gremlins, still Gremlins, Mazda in the back, BMW 2002. This series created an entire industry of people that IMSA tried to establish early on, who then made their entire lives their business in racing. Roger Mandeville with Mazdas, Amos Johnson. A number of people built their entire life and business starting with these cars. And we always had a place, or always wanted a place, and this series in particular, along later with the Firestone Firehawk series, provided a place for the average guy to go racing. You didn't have to be elite, you didn't have to have a lot of money, but you could go out, you could have a great time. And I want to say, up till this point, one of the things IMSA did was we paid everybody something. You might have won 50 bucks, but back then 50 bucks was 2 nights in a hotel room. So you could go to registration on Sunday afternoon and get paid in cash to get home. But we did that for a decade. And everybody, it was a completely novel thought process that you would actually get paid to do this, even if you were last. But that was the philosophy. We paid everybody. And it was appreciated. You also got an apple at registration when you went to get your credentials. You got Peggy Bishop would give you an apple, so that was kind of cool too. So this is a typical RS race at Daytona, you know, mob racing. The only thing that made it better than Formula Fords is they had fenders and the wheels didn't come off. So there was a lot of stuff about that, but there's probably 10 different kinds of cars in that picture. But that was what it was all about. You know, little guys racing who then became big guys later on, and that was really important to us to make that possible. Road America, first race. Road America 500. Took us a while to crack the Cliff Tufty wall as well, but finally they realized that if they wanted to do this, they had to have a bigger race than what they had at the time. But this is the Road America 500 first year. You can see the crowd's great. The little BMW won that race, 500 miles. It's the longest it ever ran in its entire career, which is pretty good. The pit lane, no speed limit. A lot of brave people, in my opinion, but that's what it looks like. That's Fitzpatrick leaving from a fuel stop, but that's the old pagoda, which when Lee Hall, who was the president at the time, said they were going to take it down, I volunteered to fly to Wisconsin so that I could light the fire on one end that would burn it to the ground, which was the easiest way to get rid of it. Mazdas were huge technical innovations with rotary engines. They provided a 330 horsepower car for virtually nothing in money compared to piston engines, and we had lots of them. That's Kent Racing, Lee Mueller, Kathy Rude. Another weird, great car, the R5 Turbo by Patrick Jacquemart. Unfortunately, he was killed in it at Mid-Ohio testing, but this was one of the other interesting cars that IMSA fostered, sometimes writing special rules for special manufacturers to enable them to be there. The Zach Speed Mustangs, again, blowing a lot of unused gas out the exhaust pipe. Klaus Ludwig, Ray Hall, Kevin Kogan, great cars, 2-liter turbos that look like that. It's gotten kind of complicated at this point. This is some of the other fun things that happen. This is testing Fitzpatrick's 935 K3 the week before Le Mans on the highway in Germany. So the crews would go over and build up these cars at Kramer's and then take them right to Le Mans, but you had to run them a little bit. So took it out on the Autobahn, gave it a little stroll down the highway, right, with a Volkswagen next to it, you know. So if you read the sign, let's see, Dortmund, yeah, Cologne, they were in Cologne. But basically, a lot of that stuff went on all the time. Sometimes here, but in Europe, it was routine to get a K plate, which is a Kramer plate. It was a dealer plate, but they just stuck it on the race car and took it out on the highway. So at this point, 82, we have 3 series. We have Camel GT, Champion Sparkplug was the RS cars. We had a 15-year relationship with that company. 12 years with Kelly Services with the Kelly American Challenge. And at this point, we started working with Skip Barber on the Barber Saab series, open wheel cars, which generated people like Diego Montoya, Juan Montoya, Brian Hurd, a lot of IndyCar people Paul Tracy ran in Skip Barber's beginning series, so to speak, pro series. But that was just starting, and we were just contemplating. Another shot of Road America. Crowds were starting to get quite large at this time, late 80s, early 90s. The 935 kept morphing into more bizarre high speed. This is a Moby Dick version from, actually it's the Andile car done in Preston Hens colors at Road America. But you can see it's quite a long way from a 911. It's flatter, wider. And then came this beast. This is the Lola T600, which was the first production series built GTP car. So Eric Broadley told Brian Redman, I need 2 orders. These cars cost $75,000 in 1981. Get me 2 orders and we'll build them. And they ended up building about 15 of them. So it was powered. This one had was run by Garrettson Enterprises, who had run Porsches. And basically, Brian Redman won the first race. And I think the video coming up, I'll ask you to watch how that car, as a true ground effects car with tunnels, which was fairly new concept at that time, how differently the car could use the racetrack over a conventional car. The downforce and aerodynamic development, to Mark's comments about how things influence. The 2 biggest changes in this kind of racing in 40 years are tire development and aero development. The engines made 800 horsepower 45 years ago. That's no big deal. It's cheaper to make that power these days. But aero and tires is what have moved these kind of cars, and in some cases you'll see outside the boundaries of what the racetracks could handle. John and Bill France always had a theory that the car needed to be bigger than the track. And that worked until something bad happened. And then you had to kind of rethink that philosophy. So by the late 80s, these kind of cars had morphed into going to every racetrack we went. For instance, here before the bus stop, at the end of the back straightaway was about 210, okay? Laguna Seca, before they made the inner loop, turn 2 up the hill at the bridge, 205. Mid-Ohio, 210. Every track we went to, the cars were faster than Indy cars, and at the tracks we shared, like at Road America in Portland, the cars actually did faster lap times than an Indy car. So we were pushing that envelope by the late 80s. But again, some views, very simple. This is kind of, those familiar with Lolas, it's kind of like a Lola T70 from the 60s, tub, with a 6-liter Chevy V8. This is a Franz Weiss Chaparral engine car. And 75 grand, the engines were like 35, 40 grand. So a Porsche 935, when you could last buy one, was well over $200,000 from Porsche. And this was a much more cost effective. Most of the teams that got these were not OE manufacturer related, but they were race teams and were in the business of racing, and we were trying to create an environment where they could be successful as teams with sponsors and everything else. And so we kept morphing to new cars, and everybody says, well, how did you think of this? It's pretty simple, actually. But we thought about what we needed. We needed a car that was half the price, that could perform as good or better than what already existed. And then we figured out moving backwards from that end point of how to get there technically. And what was frightening is none of us were engineers. But there were simple pieces of this, which were the engine had to be made available to anybody who wanted to buy it. The car had to have 2 distinct things. It had to carry 32 gallons of gas. The driver's feet had to be behind the center line of the front axles when the pedals were depressed. This was the era where Indy and F1 guys all had broken feet and legs because they stuck out and they were the first thing to hit the fence when they went into it. But you can watch this video from Laguna of how this car could just kind of drive around people. That's Danny Ungaius in a Porsche. You just drove by him like he was tied to a tree. The car could do things. That's John Paul. Same thing. He's taking an outside line in turn 10 that you don't normally do. You're in the inside, and you just drove by him. And it's all because of the ground. Here's another good shot of watch how it squares off these corners compared to the Porsche. But it just was an amazing revelation because people didn't realize what the impact of that technology would be until they saw it and went, oh, we need to get one of these. So that was sort of the end of the 935. This is the first race that the car raced in, and it won. It started 5th. It basically worked, Brian Redmond worked his way through the field, not by going any faster, but the speed the car could run, he could run the whole race at. Well, the 935s, the Fords, all those other cars had tire degradation, they had too much power on two back wheels. These cars had the right amount of power, the right weight, and the aero package just made them really good. This is Eric's favorite picture. So, another Lime Rock shot. This is one of the coolest cars we ever developed with Audi, which also became the biggest pain in the butt for us. But this is the Audi 90 GTO car, full tube frame, 5-cylinder inline turbo. Hans Stuck, Hurley Haywood, and occasionally Walter Rohrl, the rally driver, who even people like Hans Stuck said when he showed up, I raced for second. The man was amazing. So this is Lime Rock again, doing wheelies up the hill. The intriguing thing was the car is an constant all-wheel drive car, which meant it applied the drive you wanted on each wheel based on the grip level that the car was sensing that it needed. It wasn't 20% front, 80% back. It was applying that drive to the wheels as it saw it needed. So the hard part of it was we started it out, Goodyear made them special tires, 14 inches wide. We realized after a couple races, they didn't go to Daytona and Sebring because they didn't think they could finish. So they started on 14s. We summed down 2-3 races, changed that to 12, and then changed it to 10 a couple races later, and the end result was it made no difference. The 10-inch wide tires worked just as good as the 14-inch tires. Part of the reasons and the learning experience for us was technically what's going on with a car like this is the tire degradation is way better because the load of slowing down is spread over all 4 wheels. The braking was much better and the acceleration was phenomenal. And there's some video of people like Hans Stuck would just pass people in the dirt or the grass because the car could do that. So the rest of the guys are like, what's he doing? He just drove me around me on the dirt. So it was an amazing car. It's probably, in my opinion, one of the coolest, most technically advanced things that IMSA created. We did some other stuff, but this one was sort of a challenge for them and us to do this. They won the Trans Am the year before with a car, an Audi 100, made out of a real production shell. This has nothing to do with that other than the greenhouse silhouette and so on and so forth. But spectacular car. 2 remain. One is here in the USA and one is in Germany. And the significance to Audi is when they just showed their first concept Formula One car, the car that's behind the Formula One car in their display is that car. Not the R8 prototype, that's off to the side, but that car is right there. That embodies Audi's performance thing, and it's 1989. You know, it's pretty amazing what they were able to do and how they did it. Some more pictures. Here's the Lola's now taking the front all the time. And then Bob Tullius showed up with Jaguars with big V12 engines. One of the only teams in history whose people were always dressed in white and never got dirty. Not sure how they did that, but I think they had enough uniforms in the truck that if you did, you had to go change right away. But yeah, how many people have white crew guys, you know? So beautiful car, Lee Drykster design, actually originated by Mike Dale, who was the head of Jaguar USA, had nothing to do with England. They didn't want anything to do with it, so they did it here themselves. Again, one of IMSA's goals was to provide the industry, designers, constructors, the opportunity to make a living and a business in this kind of racing. So another example of that. Beautiful car. This is the hairpin at Miami in the first street races, which is the next sort of episode where we talked about racing on roads. Well, it came back with a vengeance in the 80s. At one point, we had 5 downtown street races, okay? Different concept, which was we're going to bring this show to people in their face, which is going to mess up their town for at least a month. So they'll know it's happening, okay? The buses didn't run. We messed everything up. But when all said and done, we turned on a lot of people to the game that would not have otherwise ever seen it. And it was spectacular to watch. You'll see a couple more here. Another innovation, the first plastic engine. It's Torlon 2-liter. Most of the internal components are carbon or plastic. It was sponsored by Amoco. It actually got 2 podium finishes in Camel Lights. This is also early 80s. So we had a lot of innovative stuff going on and welcomed it. You know, we looked at what we did as a place for people to try new things, and some of them worked, some of them didn't. But I threw this in here only because a lot of people don't know about it, but it actually scored 2 third places in a pretty competitive category in an engine made out of plastic. This is interesting. This is John Bishop's original drawing, which he drew in the meeting when we started arguing with Porsche between the 956 Group C car and our desire for a different kind of car. So what's different? We put out our GTP rules with the ACO in 1980. It required that engine to be available, no aluminum roll cages, which the FIA insisted was okay, which never was. Everyone we ever saw failed. And the driver had to be behind the front axle. John actually sketched this in the boardroom at Porsche at Stuttgart and showed it to him and says, here, you can lengthen it in the back or you can lengthen it in the front, but you got to make it longer to get the driver moved. And you can't have aluminum roll cages, and you got to have an engine that everybody can get. So the Group C formula, for those who don't know, was a fuel formula. World Endurance Championship, Le Mans, took kind of the same thing. The 56 version, the Group C car, which was shorter, driver out front, is the one that Stefan Beloff was killed in at Spa. And it basically probably, I don't want to say it would be avoidable, but the way he was positioned in the car and what happened to the car was tragic. Should not have been that bad, but it did. So they lasted about 2 years, and then finally, after some bad accidents in Group C, they adopted IMSA's GTP rules because it made sense. And again, none of us are engineers, but we just looked at this thing and said, this can't be right. There's a better way to do this. And we just did what we thought was correct. 956 is probably the least successful Porsche car in that regard. In the 62, I think they built 145 of them. So you think about that, 145 race cars that started at about 300 grand, and at the end, a decade later, were 700 grand, but they still built 145 of them and sold them. So that's what the fields kind of look like. You got a Porsche, Buick, March, Jaguars. We had a lot of diversity. We had 9 OE manufacturers in GTP in the 80s, as well as I think 5 or 6 more in Camel Lights, which was a lower division using normally aspirated car, which is engines, which is kind of where the gentleman guys went because it was an easier car. These things started getting really fast. That's yours truly giving a driver's meeting at Road America. You know, it's kind of like your picture in the beginning, Eric. If you can identify half the people in there, you get a prize. But a lot of the world's best race car drivers are in that mob there. Miami, this is what street racing was like in the early 80s. Biscayne Boulevard on the right, pit lanes to the left. You could see cars coming around turn 1. But it was amazing to do this. I remember the first race had Sterling Moss as the color commentator on TV, and he was just fascinated because street racing at that point was pretty much Monaco. That was it. So we did this, then we did West Palm, then we did San Antonio, then we did Columbus, then we did New Orleans, and we just kept going. And to the earlier discussions, the economic benefit was huge.
What year was this?
This is early, this is 82, I think, 81 or 82. But by the mid-80s, we had 5. But the economic impact in these cities were great. The pushback from people whose businesses got messed up and couldn't get on the bus and everything else was equally great. Noise wasn't that big of an issue because everybody knew it was going to be noisy. But just to give you an example, Race Control, the high-rise building on the left was a new building, and we were like 20 stories up and had a commanding view of the entire area. This is right along Biscayne Bay. The cruise ship port is to the left. It was just spectacular. It was a great idea. Al Holbert. Firestone Firehawk. All right, other great idea. We took street cars, told everybody to take the carpets out, put a bolt-in roll cage in it that you could take out if we asked you to take out. In other words, it could not be firmly affixed to the car. It had to be bolted in, steel. Fire bottle, that was it. Belts and a seat. Go race it. So those were street cars, which everybody said, there's no fuel cells, there's none of this, none of that. The standard of construction of these cars in that day was such that they were 5 layers of steel around the fuel tank already. It was past the Ford Pinto I Explode experiences of a decade earlier. They were pretty solid cars. We'd roll these things up. And what was cool is you could wreck it on a test day, go down to a dealership, buy another one, and build it overnight and go race the next day. How bad was that? So, but you can see there's Dodge Chargers, BMWs, Camaros, Mustangs. just about everything you could. Now, what happened over time was we had 3 or 4 categories. Each category, we listed a group of cars, and out of that group, maybe 3 or 4 were really in that configuration competitive with each other. Some of them were just hopeless. You didn't want to run Peugeots. They were terrible, but people tried. Picture of a Jaguar V12, 6.5 and 7-liter engines, based on the production Jaguar engine. Beautiful sound, very competitive. Another great picture from Sebring where you can see this Porsche is going down Hangar Straight at about 180, and there are people sitting in the grass to the left. And then there's a chain link fence, and then there's more people. And somehow we didn't manage to kill anybody, though we certainly had all the parts to do that. No big accidents, but not what we do today. But this is about mid-'80s, Bruce Levin's car. Daytona at night, just a cool shot. That's a Nissan GTP car, in the last one. And an interesting thing is what's shown this week, course, with endurance racing, we got the moniker of racing with a difference. We race at night and we race in the rain, and sometimes we race at night in the rain, which makes it really nasty. But you can see what I'm trying to illustrate here is just how people have adapted these cars to take on different race lengths, different kinds of racetrack. Angling the lights out so that you could see where the wall was essential. This is pre-live TV during the races, so now it's lit somewhat better. You can actually drive Daytona at night without headlights. People can't see you coming, but you can see where you're going. But back then, you had to have lights, and they had to work this way. And places like Sebring, the old 5.2-mile track, part of which was that 86 Haviland car, if you lost your headlights or your alternator or your battery went dead, there were times where guys just stopped and had to wait till the end of a session because they couldn't find their way back to the pits. It was that dark. Certainly at speed, you wouldn't even try to. It was pretty, what's the word? Heroic. If you won there in those conditions as a driver, it was not just consequential, it was heroically consequential, okay? Castrol Jag, these are the English cars from Walkinshaw. They replaced, Jaguar finally adopted the GTP concept for Group C as well, so they were able to build new cars, which came in a variety of forms, V12s at 7 liters, twin-turbo V6s. The XJR14, which comes up later, was the Ross Braun design, Formula One designers version of a car powered by a Cosworth. But really super big program, Castrol, yours truly at the Ferrari Museum. I throw this in there for my own benefit, but I was the guy that had to go over there and homologate this car, the Ferrari F40, which is 1989, to run in GT racing both in the US and Europe. So whenever I go back there, they always remind me. I did 2 cars with Ferrari, that one and the 333 SP prototype, which will come up in a bit. So this one sits in the Ferrari Museum. Hurley Haywood actually drove it. People don't realize Hurley Haywood drove Audis, he drove Porsches, he drove Ferraris, he drove Jaguars, he drove a lot of stuff, but he lives and breathes Porsches. So great guy. Daytona, Castrol, banking early in the morning. They won in 90 and in 88. Another beautiful piece, the Nissans. Hard to miss these cars. This is the 2nd generation GTP car. Okay, this has got some nasty accident stuff in it. This is where I talk about how the cars exceeded the racetracks. What's going on here is Road Atlanta has not got a chicane. It is a flat out turn 7 to turn what is now 12 run. It's 210. There's a dip in the middle. The dip and the downforce at this point, these cars were running 7,500 to 8,000 pound rear springs. So they needed springs like that to keep the car from grinding into the road, all right? So that plus the weight of the car, you go down in a dip at 200 miles an hour, what's gonna happen? The tires are gonna explode. So it's a little gruesome, but nobody got seriously hurt. That was same race, both cars. There was a 3rd one with the Toyota, which managed to get back to the pits because it landed right side up. These guys didn't. Pretty destructive, you know. So this is the 2nd one. So this is when we started thinking about, okay, this stuff is simply going too fast. We don't need to go that fast to put on a quality show, to put on good entertainment. We're not in the business of wrecking this stuff this way. So after that particular race, Goodyear refused to supply tires to these teams until they told them actually what the downforce potential would be, because the tires were, the cars just exceeded what they could possibly do. So some other footage from this era. Holbert was the dominant car of the 80s, followed by the Nissans in the late 80s. One of IMSA's most iconic car, Lowenbrow car. How am I doing on time there, Eric? 15 minutes. Oh, okay, good. That's another wrecked one. Jan Lammers put that one in the fence when he went out of the pits with cold tires and new brake pads. Oops, which is still happening today at Daytona. Sebring again. That's turn one before there was the change in the track, the original Nissan GTP car. So at this point, we had 5 or 6 major factory teams. We once again were struggling with a privateer cannot get the hardware to be able to compete with these people. So we were starting to think about what's next when this goes. We also were made aware at the time that R.J. Reynolds, because of federal law, would have to stop their sponsorship in 1993. So we had a number of things going on into the next decade. The Bishops and the original stockholders, the Frances and 2 other groups of stockholders, sold IMSA to a businessman in Tampa who was also the promoter of the St. Pete Grand Prix race, Mike Cohn and Jeff Parker. It wasn't the best idea. Neither one of them were racers. They, if you want to read the gory details, I wrote a book about it with George Silberman, my compatriot with this. They would do stuff like, Mike was a construction guy, so he would take the purse for the 24 hours of Daytona, and he would use that to bond jobs for the state of Florida, okay? I can say this now because when he finally got caught up, he did 15 years state and 15 years federal, non-concurrent, just got out of jail about 2 years ago. So deserved to be there for that long, as far as I know. John knows this too. It was strange days. But basically, he lasted 3 years and then basically sold to another guy who actually was a great guy, Charlie Slater. But the guy who talked Charlie Slater into buying it was the same guy that talked Mike Cohn into buying it. So Hal Kelly was not somebody, he was the promoter at Tampa and St. Pete, both of which were temporary circuit events that failed. So he wasn't really held in high regard by our other promoters. R.J. Reynolds didn't like him. So we kind of struggled there. We had economic issues of ownerships taking money out of the company and so on. So we'll forget about that. This is an example of the next mid-90s, in spite of all these underlying bad things going on, we exported our GT stuff first to Japan, all right? And we took anywhere from 6 to 8 cars and helped the JAF develop what is now Super GT. Super GT cars are essentially derivatives of the car on the right, which is a 300ZX Cunningham car built in California. And just to show them, Nissan set this up at Fuji. There's the road car, there's the race car. The whole idea was to capture the spirit of the race car, but make it, the street car, but make it a real race car, because that makes it cheaper to run, faster. So anyway, we brought 6 or 7 cars at their request. We ran 2 years at Fuji, 1 year at Autopolis, I think, so 3 races, where they started running Nismo Skylines, modified Group A cars, and started developing a tube frame structured car, which then grew into what they do now, which is very similar to this, even beyond that, without much help from us, other than bringing a variety of GTO and GTU cars and American Iron, and opening them up and letting all their OE manufacturers just come and look at the cars and ask questions, how they made, what do you use, and so on and so forth. It too developed their own industry of parts and component manufacturers for their own cars, which is great. That was one of the big goals of IMSA, was always to focus on that. So Chevy Intrepid, Wayne Taylor, 1991. 1991 was the most successful GTP year because every OE manufacturer won at least 1 race, which rarely happened. The last 962s, this is Rob Dyson's, quite a bit different than the earlier Holbrook pictures. A lot more aero stuff on it. Triple element wing on the back, which originally was 1 element. So the car won races in 1984, and it won its final race in 1993. And the reason I bring that up is the original layout of a GTP car, John Bishop drew on a piece of paper in his office in front of myself, Roger Bailey, and Charlie Rainville. And that drawing remained in the IMSA rulebook for a decade unchanged. So when people talk about stability, people like Rob Dyson invested in these cars and he raced them for 10 years. Modified them, but it's the American hot rod mentality. You got to fix it somehow. There's the XJR14, brilliant car. Look at the size of the aero device on the back of that. The spray gives you some idea what's going on, but the air going under the car. This car, Davy Jones said many times, 73 to 7,500 pound rear springs on it. But it's basically a Formula One car with a 3.5 liter engine, widened tub, holding 32 gallons of gas. But great little car, super quick. Davy Jones was one of our really good drivers, but the best comment I ever heard was Tony Dow, who managed the British cars, said, Davy Jones has wrecked every model of GTP and Group C car we've ever made. At least once. So, you know, you get guys that are really fast, but you got to expect them to damage the hardware occasionally or total it, as he did a few times. Then came the Toyotas. This is Gurney's effort. These cars were the culmination of 3 generations of previous designs. It became the dominant cars. What's really unique about this car is, if you notice, there's no holes in it other than the hole in the front. All of the air going through the car created added downforce inside the car on a second floor. All the air for the radiators, intercoolers, and the only thing sticking out of those 2 little black things, which are brake ducts for the rear brakes. But everything else went through the car. The tall scoop on the side was an intake for the turbo, just because it needed the cleaner air, because at the time the air got from the front to the engine bay for the turbo was pretty agitated. These cars also ran 7,500 pound springs. It was a 2.1 liter engine running 125 inches of boost and could make, if they wanted, 1,000 horsepower out of a 2 liter. So they didn't run that long that way, but it was there if you wanted it. So great cars. Having Gurney in the series from GTU to GTO to GTP for close to a decade was a treat. The guy was, nobody ever like him as far as I'm concerned, but wonderful man. That was the year they won, 24 hours, 93. We had carbon brakes by then, as you can see. This is Japan. Here's the group of cars we took to Autopolis. 7 of them, the whole group. That was a lot of fun. The Japanese were great hosts, but they also, you know, you see some of them, we had Exxon at that time instead of Camel. So because it was international, half the cars had Esso on it because they were still using the Esso name overseas and not here, but Exxon was the US. That's pouring rain at Fuji, Leitzinger GTU car and the 2 Cunningham GTO cars in the rain. This is another weird car. This is the most successful Porsche car ever raced. This is the Jaguar Bud Light car that you saw earlier with the rain coming out the back. They cut the roof off of it. Well, first what they did was they sold that car to Mazda, who ran it in Group C with a Mazda-badged Cosworth engine. Same car, but they changed it from a Jag to a Mazda just by putting Mazda valve covers on the engine. And they did that for about 3-4 months and decided that wasn't worth it. So Valparaiso, Indiana, they had 2 or 3 of these chassis, and Tony Dow, Max Welty, who was the Porsche head of motorsports, and Alan Springer in California go, well, we need to do something with these. So what'd they do? They dropped the 962 spec engine in the back of one of these things, which cut the roof off, reinforced the roll cage structures you can see with forward and rear braces. This is Mario Andretti testing it at Charlotte. And it's the most successful car because in 1995, at the beginning of World Sports Cars, which, side story, we knew in 93 no more GTP cars. So we had a new sponsor, which was Exxon. They had 2 requests. Make the cars look different because we don't want to be viewed as taking over someone else's old stuff. And 2, we need more of them. So the whole idea, again, was another technical shift to develop a car that private teams could buy and run. And so the World Sports Car was born. I bring this one up because it's so unique, as it only raced in our races once. After the Roar, the test at Daytona in the beginning of January, Kramer had a CK5, which was a similar car made out of a 962 chassis. He brought one. Porsche brought two of these. And we changed the rules on them between then and the race because we recognized that we really didn't set up World Sports Cars for turbos. We were trying to extend an arm to Le Mans to go, you need to get rid of what you are now running, which are GT1 cars and McLaren F1s, Porsche GT1 cars, which at the time cost about $1.5 million a piece, unavailable to everybody. Factory made so many, and that was it, done. So you're limiting your field. You're not looking forward about how you're going to sustain this. So we needed cars like this that customer cars could be made out of existing stuff. So it never raced at Daytona that year. However, the Kramer CK5, the older version, won the race under the rules that Porsche didn't like with the same engine. I got to speed up. So I say it's the most successful. It ran Le Mans twice, won both times. Finished second a third time, and then, no, finished second at Petit Le Mans in 1998, 3 years later. So I'm moving ahead. We also extended a series to Central and South America, the NACAM Marlboro GT Series. Again, IMSA cars, IMSA rules, IMSA teams, a place for them to sell their cars, okay? Another good view of the World Sports Car, taking the roof off, that's Andy Wallace, or it might be Derek Bell. And you could kind of see who was driving the car and what he was driving it with, you know? It was kind of a good view. James Weaver and Rob Dyson's Spice with a Ferrari engine in it. Again, all that stuff was generally available. Little video from this era. It's Phoenix at night. Wayne Taylor won the first championship in a rotary-powered car by not winning a race, but finishing in the top 5, I think, 12 times. So it's okay. This is funny. You'll love this. Whoops. Oh, wait, there's more. He pushes it back over, gets back in, and drives it away. The car of the decade is clearly the 333 SP. This car, again, I went to Ferrari with Giampiero Moretti, met with Montezemolo and Piero Ferrari, and said, we need a customer car. So they committed to making this car solely for customers. Ferrari never ran one themselves. Pure customer car is exactly what we wanted. It wasn't that expensive. As Piero Ferrari said, the little badge on the front end, that's $25,000 just to get the little badge on it because it's a Ferrari badge. So there was a little inflation to that, but you bought a car, you got an engine, 4 corners, and a full body and a transmission for about $750,000, and that was most of the parts you needed to run a whole season, including the car. It's a great deal. Rob Dyson, the other great car, was the Riley. Many engine combinations in it. Great shot of the Ferrari. They spit flames out the back and made great noises with a V12 turning 12,500 RPM. It was magic. Spectators loved them. GT cars, still the mainstay. 99, Audi and BMW showed up. At this point, the ACO and the FIA adopted IMSA's World Sports Car rules, but then had to put their mark on it. So they put bigger engines in it and put aerodynamic diffusers on them on cars that weren't designed to have them, which immediately obsoleted all the Ferraris and made the Audi and the BMW cars. That's a 6-liter V12, the car to have, which you can see here. All the old cars are in the back. The 2 Panoses, the 2 BMWs, the Lola's a new car, but then you got the Ferraris and the Rileys in the back, and they could no longer compete with the cars at the front. Grand-Am comes along, 1999. In 1997, George Soberman and I left when Andy Evans acquired IMSA, which was the 5th owner in 7 years, and decided we didn't like to work under his ethics. So IMSA got split in half. Half of the people, the management and director type level people, ended up in NASCAR Daytona. The rank and file people, part-time people that ran the races as race staff, ended up getting the contract to run the ALMS, okay, with Don Panos' program. Again, new car. We had to get rid of the old World Sports cars again. Grand-Am did Daytona prototypes. Interesting design. Ford, Lexus, Ford. That's a Doran, which became a Dallara. Riley. So what happened there was the benefit Grand-Am had was at the time, International Speedway Corporation, we had Daytona, we had Watkins Glen, we had Phoenix, we had Fontana, We had racetracks that we owned that let us race there reasonably. So in the long run, the ALMS had Sebring in Atlanta, and we both would pick up Mid-Ohio or Three Rivers or some other events to build out a schedule. We used to go to the Glen twice. We used to go to Daytona twice. But basically, for about 6 or 7 years, these two things ran in parallel with opposite philosophies. One was cost effective, lots of cars, all prototypes in that shot. There's no GT cars. All right. So ALMS had OE manufacturers spending a lot of marketing dollars, but they didn't have very big fields or lots of cars. They had a connection with Le Mans, and eventually by the early teens, I don't want to say one was better than the other. They were two different philosophies, but Grand-Am had pretty much caught up and passed on the TV viewership, on the car count, and on the spectator attendance at events. And then the smarter people got involved and said, why don't we combine these two things and make something better? And that's where we are today. We also did some cool stuff. This is Mike Shank breaking the world closed course speed record at Daytona, which was held for 20-something years by the Mercedes C111 done at Nardo in Italy, which I think is a 7-mile or a 9-mile oval. He beat it with a 3-liter EcoBoost turbo production engine. But you could see the line. You could see the 4 decimal points. Pretty high-tech stuff when we would do stuff like that along the lines of Bonneville. More DP cars. Then DP version 3. These are the Corvettes, the final version. There were 3 generations of DP cars. Then the ALMS, you have the Audi, the Corvettes. They were definitely the ALMS cars. Panos, Audi, R8. This is a classic end of race. Oh yeah? You think that was cool? Watch this. This is Jörg Bergmeister, and I forget who's driving the Corvette, but it's not very friendly at all, as you can about to see. Oh yeah, see that? That's a wall. That was to the flag. So the Porsche won the race. The Corvette was second, but crossed the line backwards, shedding parts. But luckily, I didn't have to have anything to do with that. Vipers. Another Corvette. Beautiful cars. Now we're getting near the end. This is DPI. DPI followed the merger between 2 years of running ALMS and Grand-Am cars together and then creating a new car. This is very similar to the car we have now without the hybrids. Sebring. Penske running the factory Acura team. Castroneves. So at this point, IMSA is starting to really boom. When I say boom, record crowds, great TV numbers, social media is exploding, and it just grew from this point to where we are today, where I'll say now, because I'm running out of time unless I take it out of your lunchtime. This was last lap at Petit Le Mans. Die hard pass, but he's going so slow, the car he's trying to pass passed him going down the hill, and he still finished second. We don't push for that, but it's so competitive and so close. People talk about BOP and all the rule stuff. We're working margins of 0.03%, where some of the teams, the 2 drivers cannot drive the same car on the same day within that number. And yet the manufacturers want us to fix that. It's like, no. Some ending ones. We do this now every year at Daytona. That's the field for the Rolex 24, probably 2 years ago. Turn 1 Sebring, just GT cars this time. Huge. We have 18 OEM partnership agreements with car manufacturers, most of anyone in the world right now. Penske's Porsches. Roger Penske said when they first tested this car in Barcelona, these are the most technically advanced race cars on the planet, including Formula One, IndyCar, anything else. They are made with stuff that was not off the shelf. Everything in these cars, hybrid-wise, battery-wise, MGU-wise, was developed specifically for this, again, in order to have a life until now, 2030. So we'll be using this componentry, and it has scalability for another 5 years. Easy. Again, nighttime, evening at Road Atlanta, Daytona. Cars are really cool. They do really great things. They leave the pits on the electric. They have no alternator, and they just hit the ignition button, and the car starts itself from the electric. It's got an 800-volt battery in it. The 800-volt battery can give it 150 more horsepower, not on demand, but over a period of time. It regenerates itself when you're on the brakes and when you disengage the clutch. The input shaft, that's where the MGU works, is the input shaft. BMWs, they just debuted their second generation of the car at Daytona last weekend. Here you have Aston Martin, and again, off we go. So Daytona tells us the Rolex 24 now is the second most profitable event at the racetrack after the Daytona 500. So road racing and sporty car stuff has come a long way. But you can see how quick these things are. They're pretty fast. At Daytona now, they're slightly over 200. I threw this in just to give some idea of IMSA and the Corvette. From the third car from the top is all IMSA, ALMS, Grand-Am Corvettes. First two, no. But the third one is a Greenwood, so that's where it starts. But it's kind of a neat photo to show how GM has used Motorsports and Corvette. Final picture, that's the Bishop France Trophy. Every champion of every class in the overall division, GTO, GTU, GTX, GTP, on the front straightaway in front of the new tower building at Road Atlanta with the Michelin Man on it. And I'm done. Thank you. That's where all the pictures came from. I'm sure there's some questions. JC.
Well, Mark, that was absolutely fabulous, and I don't know if we want to open it up for questions. We're into the lunch break right now.
Sorry, guys, I took out some lunchtime.
For the record, how old were you?
You can ask Mark questions at lunch.
How old were you when you started with John Bishop?
I had just turned 16 in the spring of 1974. And I did my 50th 24-hour race this year of only 2 years. 1 year, I was actually kind of helping John Cooper at the Speedway after Andy Evans took over. George and I went over there at their request. And then by 99, I was over there regularly beginning to make Grand-Am for Bill Jr. and Jim France. So it's been a great run. I think the most important thing, which I could talk to, is, you know, the cars are cool and the events are cool, and I took a lot of notes, but the people you have the opportunity to work with, your parents, John and Peg Bishop, priceless. You know, I've been given great guidance, great teachings. I was told day one, you can make every mistake you want once. Second time, we're going to start thinking you're stupid. And I said, okay, I don't want to be stupid. That was a direct quote.
Yeah,
Okay.
Not so much a question, but as a spectator for a lot of different types of racing, I want to thank IMSA for being the most friendly and open and inviting, like the older Formula One days would have been.
We appreciate that because we go to great lengths to make sure that stays in place, and we think that's what the sport needs, and we would hope that others would think of doing the same thing, which they don't. But I think that's one of our great successes. I'll say one more thing. This year, every race we had,